Welcome to the DRS Train podcast. This service is the Season Review 2023 Part 2. Today we are serving the front four carriages Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Aston Martin. I'm your driver, Peter Brook, and your conductors today are Nav F1 and Psychedelicon. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Peter. Looking forward to looking at these four Frontrunner teams today.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, good to be here. I'm really looking forward to this one.
So, in our first part, we covered the back four teams, and so now we're going to go to the front. And so, first up, we need to start with our Constructors' Champions, which is Red Bull. And I mean, there's not much to say in that it was, I suppose, a near faultless performance, aside from the second driver. I mean, they won all but one race, and the only race that they didn't win, Singapore, was the only one that showed off any genuine weaknesses in the car's design and also strategy. It's just, there's little else for me to say beyond it being one of the best campaigns in Formula One history, if not the best.
Yes,
Yeah.
there are a lot of analysts and journalists and even team principals were quick to say that it might have been the fastest car ever in Formula One, maybe the most dominant one. So they really deserve credit on that. There were a lot of factors who went into this. Adrian Newey just building a great car in 2022. Because they already had an advantage at the end of last year, it meant that there wasn't that much to focus on. There wasn't that much time to find, so they could really focus on the car they already had. Whereas every other team around them had to change something, had to maybe completely change the design of one of their components. And on top of that, having Max Verstappen as the driver who also had a pretty much faultless season, well, it just leads to this extreme level of domination that, well, a lot of us had never seen before. And we thought that we wouldn't see a car more dominant than the Mercedes in the 2010s, but somehow we kind of did.
Yeah, the Mercedes cars were really dominant, but this Red Bull seemed even more dominant at times. At least it was in terms of how far it finished ahead of other teams in the Constructors' Championship. Not so much on track. On track, I mean, Mercedes never actually managed to win a race where only the first driver was on the lead lap and everyone else was on already lap. That never happened with Mercedes and also didn't happen this year. The margins by which Mercedes led the field in 2014 were even bigger than this. Like into the first turn at times, the Mercedes cars were already so far ahead that like DRS 2 laps later wouldn't have done a thing. So, and this year at least, sometimes we saw Charles or other drivers hang on to the Red Bull cars for a few laps before finally losing touch. I mean, I say the Red Bull cars, but it's really just Max Verstappen. Well, is it that? They did hold on to Max Verstappen at the front because Perez wasn't at the front most of the time. He was at the front a few times at the start of the year. He had a pretty good start of the year, admittedly. So, like, we have to give him credit where credit is due. But then he just kind of fell apart after those first 4 or 5 races.
Yeah, I think in terms of pace relative to rivals, the car doesn't stand out that much because there have been teams, obviously the Mercedes era, the pace difference was much bigger. And then you could point at, Williams in 92 and 93 and even Ferrari in the early 2000s. Where it does stand out is inconsistency because Mercedes still had races where they were weaker or races where things went wrong for them because the cars very rarely would break down or the drivers would crash into each other. But that hasn't happened with Red Bull because they had faultless reliability all season. Max made pretty much no mistakes, and any mistakes he did make were very, very minor and had little to no effect on his end result. And he ended up being so dominant that it made Checo essentially pointless because Max single-handedly won them the constructors' title, which is actually quite difficult. It's difficult anyway. I think over such a long season, it can be even harder to kind of maintain that such a high level. Particularly if you win the championship, it's easy to level up, to kind of ease off a bit. And he didn't do that. He just kept winning, even after taking the title. Yeah, that's it's the reliability that makes the difference because there were some races where, but even towards the end, where it was actually quite close. with their rivals, but they were just able to keep ahead because they could rely on the car not breaking down or because they had very, very good strategies.
Yeah, I mean, Verstappen leading more than 1,000 laps in the season, that's something that comes with consistency and extremely good reliability. So it was that feeling going into the races that you knew that if Max was at the front, nothing would happen. I think that's what really, really set apart the tone of this season from some of the previous ones, especially for Merck, because at least in the past, I feel, especially in the 90s, you were never far away from just a car exploding. And this time, there wasn't, well, at least after the midway point of the season, I don't think anyone was expecting Verstappen to have a DNF because of the engine or just some faulty component. And that that was just, a scary prospect for the other teams. We also have to remember that at some point we weren't even sure how much Max was pushing. After I'd say 10 races, when Max started to really pull away from the rest of the competition, we realized that he wasn't using his full engine or the full energy. So there is also that question of how fast really was that car. Well, by the end, McLaren started threatening them at some races, and I think Red Bull would push a bit more there. But generally, I still believe that there was more performance.
I don't think that McLaren did threaten them in the races. They did threaten them in quali because the McLaren did have quite the, well, would you? I don't know if resurgence is the right word, but quite the peak past the first half of the season, and where they really suddenly started to compete for pole positions and qualified on the first and second laps whenever Checo wasn't up there or whenever Leclerc wasn't up there for that matter, because often, of course, it was also Leclerc on even on pole and of course not winning from pole the whole season. But what I wanted to touch on there as well is you said something along the lines of that Max was never really under threat to win in the races that he did win. But I disagree because there's two examples of where he, well, one of them where it was like more like wishful thinking from the fans, where the changeable conditions did make it look like for a while as if Alonso had a chance to win, which was of course Monaco, because that was pretty unpredictable. But Aston Martin completely screwed up their strategy and pitted both cars twice, if I remember correctly. And then, of course, there was Las Vegas, where Max didn't get to lead the race until quite late, and even then, Leclerc and Perez kept somewhat hanging on to him, and Max didn't win with like half a minute's lead there. Let's just say, like, a mistake would have cost him the win there. Even a small mistake, like going off running way too wide, like doing something like Lewis did in Azerbaijan 2021, like with the magic button or something. Like a longer turn like that would have already cost him the win. A spin would have cost him the win. But of course, Max doesn't spin anymore. Or was that this year at the start of the year where he spun and just kept going and then won a race? Was that this year?
That
Or was
was
it last
Hungary
year?
last year. He did that 360 spin
Oh yeah, that
and
was
still
last year.
won because Ferrari put Leclerc on hards and he dropped like 5 places or something. But
Well,
yeah,
it's interesting because, Verstappen only got 9 fastest laps, and that's one little issue, little qualm I have with the fact that you get a point for the fastest lap. It's that you don't really get to see as much as in the past who was actually the fastest in race pace, and you will always just get a random guy who just pitted on softs at the end. Because one of the reasons, well, I'm sure Karen would have loved this, but one of the reasons that Kimi often had fastest laps is just in race pace, he would do well. Whereas now, well, you see Verstappen just having 9 fastest laps when, he should be having 18, 19. It also just doesn't show how at least I think, comfortable he was in terms of race pace for most of the season. And regarding Monaco, yeah, that was a big scare, I think. And I think many thought that that would be the only chance of Red Bull not winning a race. Obviously, Singapore happened. But I thought it was interesting that Verstappen didn't suffer any retirements when Perez did suffer two retirements. It just shows that you also need that part of luck. And in the end, everything worked out for Verstappen and Red Bull. It didn't for Perez. I'm not sure we will see a more dominant season, partly because I'm not sure the FIA would want that.
Yeah, I mean, there was only there were kind of excuse me, there were kind of scares of reliability problems because Max was always complaining about the gearbox, and obviously he did have a gearbox failure in qualifying in Jeddah, and then at the end of Kota he had something was going wrong with the brakes, and then Hamilton closed up a loss in the final lap, and even if he passed him, he got disqualified anyway, so it wouldn't have made a difference. I can't recall Checo having any mechanical failures, but it was you were just kind of waiting for it to happen, and doing this of basically everybody because it's just astonishing how much reliability has improved so quickly to the point now that mechanical failures almost never happen when they used to happen all the time. Like even 10 years ago, they were still fairly common, and that made a huge difference because any other season he wouldn't have won all but one races because even in like the days of the Williams cars 92 93, you know, McLaren 88, they still had the cars still broke down. It's just usually their teammate was there to pick up the pieces. But this time, Max didn't even need Checo to be there to pick up the pieces because he could just do it himself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100% reliability record, which is incredible when you have such a good engine and such a good car.
Yeah, I think, but the one thing that I was thinking earlier this season was, yeah, Max is driving brilliantly and dominant and all of that, but can we really expect him to go for what would it have been 18 wins in a row or something without any reliability issues? And we did eventually like find out that he did not in fact win that many races in a row because of Singapore, but that wasn't reliability, that was setup. So yeah, I mean the reliability of that car was pretty much flawless, but I mean something can always happen, and just the likelihood of winning so many races in a row, I was just expecting reliability issues to pop up at some point, but never did. And we got a historic 10 victories in a row out of it, and only, like you said, only 9 fastest laps, which, yeah, I very much agree on what you said there, because back then the fastest laps meant a lot more, because you didn't just like do the whole shenanigan where you pitted on the softs at the end instead of fastest lap and snatched that 1 point away from someone else, but you might have actually been inferior on race pace the whole time. Like, I don't know, didn't Joe even get a fastest lap this season? Like, one of the back markers got a fastest lap.
First race, he got fastest lap, and he wasn't the fastest driver. He just pitted for quali tires right at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like, you got the fastest lap, but you didn't merit having that on your statistic. Like,
What they need to do
really.
instead, I think they need to give you a point for pole position. That's never happened before, and it's like I think maybe we need to do that because everyone makes this huge things about people being amazing qualifiers, and it's like, well, maybe we should reward them something, even if it's only something small.
But now imagine if that 1 point ends up tilting the end of season balance to that one driver wins the championship, then the championship was won on Saturday. I mean, technically Max also won the championship on Saturday this year because he did, of course, wrap the title in a sprint, but that's a different kind of points payment, and he would have won it anyway. So that matters a bit less. But like, imagine if it's a Saturday that ultimately ends up deciding that 1 point that from quali that made the difference.
I mean,
Well,
yeah,
I think the issue, I can't remember what exactly it was with the giving a point to the pole sitter. I think it was if you give a point to the pole sitter and he finishes first in the sprint and second in the race, but that already gives him 26 points, whereas the other guy gets 25. There was something that someone found out would be quite unfair if you give a point to the pole sitter, but I'm not. I just can't.
I can't really see how it's not something you can cheat your way into in the way
Yeah,
that like
yeah.
fastest lap point is we just pit at the end. It's like no, this is everyone's already trying to go for pole and go as fast as they can. So why not give them another incentive? Even if it's only 1 point at the end of the day. Like 22 points across the season is well for a car this dominant, it's a drop in the ocean. Like it
Yeah.
could make the difference, but it's unlikely to mean the title's won on qualifying.
It could be quite meaningful for a team like Haas that lucked into a pole last year, and that point probably could be worth a lot to the backmarker teams who might just end up through changeable conditions and unpredictability and being there at the right time to get that pole and get that point. So that's a good point I didn't consider before. Yeah.
I can't remember what exactly that was, but yeah, I feel like that would make more sense. The fastest lap thing, yeah, Red Bull only having 9 for me just shows that it's a bit flawed. It's just about knowing which driver had a 30-second gap to the guy behind him in the end, and like apart from Leclerc in 2022 in Belgium messing up and pitting when he shouldn't have, it's not that memorable. I guess sometimes you get lost. There's a quali lap on the last lap from a driver trying to get the fastest lap, but there's never something impressive with it. So,
It would only
but
be
yeah,
interesting if you had more than one driver trying to do it on the final lap, or
exactly.
if they pit and then they mess the pit stop up and end up losing several places. But people just pit and it's fine. Like that would make it interesting if it's. I mean, because Max joked that do we want to do some pit stop practice in Spa because he had a gap he could do it, and they just said no because I guess they knew if it goes wrong we've lost the win.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing. People just there aren't enough mistakes anymore. Like drivers don't crash anymore. The cars don't break down. The pit stops are always fine. Like nothing goes wrong. I can't remember the last time a driver just like crashed on their own from their own mistake and not something just breaking on the car or whatever. Like it just doesn't happen.
Alonso had a spin in Monza, was it?
He crashed in the sprint in Belgium
Yeah,
at Blanchimont.
Yeah.
I mean there were other mistakes. I know from the front runners. Yeah, Alonso crashed in the sprint race, and well, he spun on his own at Vegas, even though there was more of an excuse there. But yeah, Spa was the most obvious mistake. And see Lando, he didn't crash, but he made a few mistakes in quali. Back to Red Bull, I just think that next season it's going to be the exact same. I cannot see how anything would change. I don't think. Well, we're gonna come on to McLaren and Aston Martin. Aston Martin this episode, McLaren in another episode. But I cannot see how they would catch up. So yeah, my bottom line for Red Bull is extremely good season, and I am certain that it's going to be the exact same for the next 2 seasons.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. Probably, but I mean, McLaren made up so much ground over the season and not just like afterward or in between. Like Aston Martin made pretty much their whole gains over the winter, so they might do that again if they're lucky, if they get the development right, and that seems to be what they're good at right now. But McLaren can put in the development work during the season. Like Aston Martin don't currently have a good development driver in the car driving every race, so that's a disadvantage. McLaren, I don't know. Norris is not exactly a development driver, is he? Like because that he has a stated oversteer preference, but then that car was the most understeery car on the grid for pretty much his whole duration at McLaren, except like middle into 2023, where it suddenly the upgrades introduced for once a front end to the car, which was nice to see because suddenly he and especially Piastri flourished in that car, so that was nice. Aston Martin, yeah, I don't see it happening. Ferrari, are they gonna get their act together? Nah.
Well,
Especially like
this leads us
Ferrari
to
announced.
talk about the main competitors, which is Mercedes, our second, the second front runner we are going to look at. Mercedes, well, you were talking about development. They brought the zero sideboard design into this season, and they were the only ones to do it. No one really understood why, when Toto had been slagging off the design last season so much. But then they turned it around when they just had this. They turned it around with a new design, a car that was ostensibly more suited to Sir Lewis Hamilton, which must be underlined because Lewis was much more comfortable in the car than George for most of the season. Last season was a bit of a weird one. We thought that George was much faster than Lewis in many races, and then we found out that Lewis was testing and developing many components basically for 2023. And yeah, this new design was good. Will it compete with Red Bull? I do not think so. But was the design good? Yes. And was Toto Wolff absolutely wrong in repeating himself at every other race that they have a bad car? Yes, he was wrong, because that was utter nonsense. And it was one of the most frustrating things for me this season, that he thought that they had some shitbox for some reason.
Yeah, the way that Toto spoke about the car, you would have thought that this was the 2021 Williams or something along those lines, and should have never been able to, like, this car doesn't deserve to win. And it's like, ultimately you did build the second best car. In any other season, the second best car would have won a race, pretty much. I can't think of many other seasons where that wouldn't have happened. Like, there was some,
2004.
yeah, I was gonna say there was an extreme Ferrari dominance before, but like, that's not the rule, that's the exception. So like, in pretty much any other season, the second best car would have won a race, but of course it ultimately was the third best car that did win a race. But Mercedes, I don't know, they Lewis at the start of the year seemed very disgruntled with Mercedes having kept the zero pod concept, but then Russell called him out and said, "You support this decision too. Like, after the 2022, we had this discussion at the team. Are we gonna follow this concept, or are we gonna move to a different concept?" And everyone agreed. Okay, well, we haven't gotten there yet with this one, but we're gonna keep developing this one, and then maybe the zero pods are gonna be just fine. And Lewis was on board with that, according to Russell. But then Lewis just kept bitching about it at the start of the year the whole time, and they ultimately did end up switching around. But also, Toto at the time said that the upgrades that they brought could not include a new chassis. It only included like different bodywork and stuff. So the aero changed and everything, but the underlying chassis with the weight distribution, all that, apparently did not change much. And so the window of operations did not improve as much as an outside observer might have thought from how much the car visually changed, because it did change, like, the hood changed basically, but under the hood not that much changed. And that's gonna be, of course, where the big changes are coming in for 2024, hopefully. And maybe, just maybe, Mercedes can get their act together and challenge again.
Yeah, they're basically engine merchants, and they've been exposed as such, because that was really what made them so strong in the previous kind of era of car design, was how good the Mercedes engines were. And we saw this in how good Williams were, even though the car was terrible, because it had a Mercedes engine. But now this is an era where the much more focus on aero, and that's where Red Bull have always been second to none. And so that's why the car is still good, but just not good enough, and it's not nearly as bad as Toto is putting it out. But yeah, Hamilton, he's been complaining a lot about, they don't listen to me when it comes to development and what I want to do. It's like, I really find that hard to believe when you've got this team wrapped around your finger, and they're more than happy to paint the car black and do all the PR side of the Hamilton Commission. They'll do all of that you've requested, but when it comes to actual car development and the stuff that matters on track, they're just going to not listen to you. Like, no, I don't buy that at all. Even though Hamilton maybe isn't known so much as a development driver, because it was only around 2021 that he actually started doing simulator work and track walks. He didn't really do either of those before. He would just get in and drive the car.
Yeah, 2022 was the big season where he actually had to start doing development driver work, and so it raises the question even more. If you tested the parts for this concept, then why didn't you tell the, like, you went along with this, you picked the parts that worked, Russell got the upgrades once they were proven to work, and the team made a step forward in 2022 as a result. They did win a race towards the end where they weren't close to winning one at the start. So you were on board with this, Lewis, and then you do that 360. Oh well, here's another season where we're not winning races. Now I'm really pissed off, and now I'm gonna call out the team. Like, yeah, but you're just another hypocrite because you're like you're partially responsible for this happening. It's like sort of like Alonso at Aston Martin, except that he didn't actually call them out. This year it was Stroll that called them out, but we'll get to Aston Martin eventually. Like, don't worry about that. We're gonna get there. Yeah. Also, something I wanted to add was that we've actually seen on the aero front, and that Mercedes, from mainly engine merchants, we've seen Mercedes try 3 different aero setups, or 3 different, completely different aero concepts in this new regulation era. Because of course there was the zero pods, then there was the one that followed the zero pods. Then, but also something that often gets forgotten is at the first 2022 test, Mercedes rolled up with a 2022 regulation car that had basically the wine bottle shape of their previous regulation era for the whole bodywork. And I would have really liked to see that attempt a few races, because that in testing seemed to have a nice operating window. It wasn't quite as fast, but that could have been gotten there maybe with improvements to the, just some upgrades to the package. But the operating window didn't seem to be so. They tried lots of different stuff with that in testing, and then they decided, okay, but we still have this clever zero pod concept in the backhand, and we're going to do that for the second test. And yeah, we're gonna be the standout team, and we have this thing that nobody else has, and this is gonna be the new meta. And yeah, it wasn't.
It's interesting you talk about operating window, because for a good chunk of the season, at least with the new concept that rolled in, the Merc had an extremely good operating window on low fuel and usually mediums or softs, and they would often be, at least for a few laps, the best on race pace in the last stint. And it was interesting because I thought that would carry on, and then maybe by the end of the season, in race pace, they might go back to, at least on faster tires, or at the end of the race, go to a point where they can actually challenge Red Bull. And that didn't happen. I'm not sure why. Maybe they got lost again, because we must remember this was a messy season for Merck, not just on track, but behind the scenes. I mean, well, James Vowles left, of course, but James Allison and Mike Elliott, that whole public call out by Toto, I thought that was very badly managed. Just kind of openly shaming Mike Elliott in front of everyone. No one was really supporting each other. Lewis was pointing fingers, Toto was pointing fingers to everyone but Lewis, of course. George was not happy because, yeah, he was unlucky sometimes, but also he was making mistakes and wasn't happy with the setup. It was extremely messy. And I don't think, even last year, I think it wasn't as messy, because at least last year it was just, we are bad. Let's go forward now. I think that's what I saw. Whereas this season, there were points where, Lewis was supposedly considering leaving, and then obviously Toto just folds in half to make sure that Lewis is not leaving. I'm eager to see how next car's W15 is going to be, because the main problems of the W14 was a lack of rear downforce and just this very narrow operating window where sometimes it would be stellar, Hungary pole position, but if they sort that out, they could actually have a decent car for next season.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean they're making a big hoo-ha about next year. Oh, the car's looking really good in the wind tunnel and development and that, and it's like I'm not expecting any miracles next year from anyone, because there aren't any major rule changes. the teams, same teams, they've all got the same drivers as well. I think we are just going to pick up where we left off, and Red Bull are going to continue to dominate. I mean, maybe McLaren will continue to get closer to them, but otherwise, I don't think much else is really going to change. And I think we can expect all the cars when they're launched to look basically the same as well.
McLaren car was really interesting at the end of the season because when it actually was that strong, it still wasn't consistently strong because there were still a bunch of tracks and a bunch of conditions where suddenly it was lower midfield again, and so it was like all over the place. So they have some ways to go in actually making that car more of an all-round good package and not just a horse to bet on that only works at certain circuits and the rest of the time it doesn't know where it's going. So there's that for McLaren. The only thing I really care about for Mercedes next year is the livery going to be silver or is it going to be black again? Because I don't really care much for Mercedes, but I think Mercedes, that needs to be silver arrows. Just needs to be.
I think it will stay black as long as Lewis wants it to stay black.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. One last thing I wanted to say about Merck was the teammate battles that we had on track this season. The fact that they were more often on the same part of the tarmac this year meant that George, he was a bit more Osama bin Russell with his own teammate than last year. There were a lot of close calls before the big shunt in Qatar. So they touched a high speed in qualifying in Spain. Not sure what that was about. There was that robust defending in Japan from Lewis. And I wonder what will happen next season if the car is actually good, because George is obviously frustrated with his performance. He is seeing Max pull away in terms of who is the best young driver in Formula One right now, and even the second best. Well, most do not see him as the second best. It's either Lando or Charles's fangirls rating them as the second best, and George just seems to be fading away a little bit in that conversation. When I would say, arguably, when he entered F1, he was maybe a bigger prospect than Charles. Maybe that was British bias at that point from the media. But if the Merc is good next season, I really want to see how George is going to manage that, because I don't think he will want to be beaten by a 39-year-old Lewis at all.
Yeah, of that, if you will, Twitch quartet that was that generation of drivers, George is the only one currently facing a multiple-time world champion as teammate. So that would explain some of the recency bias, because he's the only one who hasn't been comfortably beating their teammate, if I remember correctly, because there was Max obviously beating Checo, there's Leclerc, mostly matching Sainz, and like depending on what fans you listen to, Leclerc is actually the much stronger driver than Sainz, and he's only had bad luck, and Sainz is, or the other fans see Sainz as the better driver and think, okay, he's been more consistent, he makes these strategy calls from the cockpit that would warrant making him number one driver. I'm in that camp personally, as you well know. Yeah, who else was there? There's also Lando. Okay, Lando was also comfortably ahead of Piastri. The quality gap decreased over the season, but it didn't shrink to something as small as the one at Ferrari or Mercedes. Like, Russell has been beaten comfortably, but if you look at the slideshow, you can see it as well. These times are normalized, but 0.016 seconds behind Hamilton on average across all sessions, quali sessions that is, and sprint shootout sessions this year. That's the smallest gap on the grid, by quite a margin. Like, the second smallest is 600 bigger, and that's Ferrari. Everyone else has a notably bigger gap. So I don't know. Russell isn't as far off Hamilton as it would seem, but in terms of the race head-to-head and the results, of course, it's a different question, different matter again entirely. But yeah.
It's one of the closer teammate pairings, because that's one of my biggest takeaways from 2023. Even if you complain, the racing wasn't that good and there was no championship fight, is you can look at the gaps between teammates, because we saw some very one-sided ones, such as at Red Bull and Williams and Aston Martin, where one teammate just crumbled and the other one shone. That didn't happen here because both drivers, generally Hamilton was stronger in races. George had more off races, but then Hamilton also had a lot of off races himself, particularly towards the end. And so they both, and it's not the thing you would expect him to just be able to walk over George quite easily, and that hasn't been the case. And if they find themselves in a position next year where they are actually fighting for the title, George likes to play the team player, but I don't think he's gonna deny himself the opportunity to go for the title. He's not going to surrender and say, yes, I'll play number 2 to Lewis.
Yeah, well, on that, the fact that Lewis finished third in the standings and George finished eighth, it's harsh, I would say, on the standings. As both of you mentioned, it wasn't that far at all on the actual track, but it looks so bad. And we know that as much as drivers say stats are for Wikipedia, fans care about stats a lot nowadays. And when fans will revisit their head-to-head and their standings, having one driver in third, basically top of this upper midfield podium contender pack, and the other one in eighth, I think a lot of it is due to Singapore. If he hadn't crashed, he would have still been eighth, but I think much closer. It shines a bad light on George in terms of points, and I really, really think next season he's gonna be the opposite of a team player. And Ciaron always talks about these young drivers and who just accepts their fate, a bit like Charles, and who just doesn't seem mature enough, a bit like Lando. One thing I will give George is I think there's a lot of frustration growing up there, and I think his third season at Merck might be where we see all of it explode, basically.
I mean, save for the reliability issues, basically George was having a Ferrari season at Mercedes. Maybe, I don't know. That's just something I came up with a second ago, and I thought, hey, does that actually work? I'm not sure if that works, but that's something that came to mind. Towards the end of the season, yeah, like you said, Hamilton also had a few off races because I remember a few. I don't remember the specific tracks right now, but I remember Russell had damage a few times and still finished ahead of Hamilton and lapped a lot faster, despite having damage on the car, and Hamilton didn't. One of those races, Hamilton also had damaged front wing, so he also would have had it. But if I remember correctly, that race Hamilton didn't actually lose time to the front wing and actually lapped faster after he got the damage.
I think, wasn't it Vegas? He had that collision
Yes,
with Piastri.
Vegas.
Yeah. And the damage just didn't affect him. I mean, it very rarely does. He's had God knows how many collisions with drivers and ended up basically getting away with it because his car is indestructible.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw that even like last year in Spain. He had that collision with Magnussen and ended up basically being the fastest guy on track. But yeah, Qatar was an interesting one because Hamilton wiped them out at the start, but then George, on pace, he probably could have finished second and maybe challenged for the win if that hadn't happened. So that blew things a lot. But then Hamilton also had, like, Interlagos was very puzzling because last year they got a 1-2, and then this year they were just absolutely nowhere on pace at all. And then Abu Dhabi wasn't brilliant for Lewis. I mean, he passed Tsunoda on the last lap and then fluffed that. But then they had, Kota, where, although okay, the car was illegal technically, but the pace was good. It was very inconsistent over those final few races.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that leads us to the next frontrunner we are looking at, Ferrari, which was perhaps less inconsistent. I think we will agree that they were slightly, I would say they were the most consistent one from this podium contender bunch, so from this Merck, Aston, McLaren, and themselves group. They were always up there, kind of. There were not a lot of races. Well, actually, was there a race where they completely were off the pace? I can't remember just now. Maybe Peter,
Well,
if
there
you
was
can think.
Spain when
Leclerc was off
Leclerc
the
got
pace in Spain, yeah.
went out in Q1 and just did nothing all race.
But Sainz qualified second.
Yeah, that was just Leclerc being useless for no reason.
Exactly. So the car was always up there, and it's a weird season because yes, they finished third in the constructors, but they get a win, And most people will remember that Sainz win as a very famous one. I think it's actually going to stick through the 2020s decade as a famous win. But they miss out on P2 in the constructors because of their own fault. Sainz also not turning up to Abu Dhabi, but then obviously Ferrari giving him a weird ass strategy that would have never worked.
Right.
It's extremely weird. I think they can be happy with their season, but it was so chaotic and so full of stupid mistakes that in the end they leave the season as a bit of the clown team from the top, really.
It's the kind of season where, like 2021, it was bad, but it looks better than it was because they weren't fighting for the title because there was nothing at stake. Whereas last year, in terms of the race, the car's performance was probably not that different, but last year just looks like a total train wreck because they threw away the title. But this year, they never got a shoe in to be looking at it. And they have that status of being the only team to beat Red Bull and actually get a win. But it mostly wasn't really up to their standards. Particularly, again, the hype train. They're always saying how, again, they're doing just like Mercedes. They're like, oh yeah, everything's looking really good next year, and we're going to have entirely new car with all different components. And it's like, we just know it's not going to work. They just don't like Leclerc. Leclerc just isn't him. Like, he just disappears on Sunday. But Sainz could be, because Sainz is actually quite smart, but then he just has a lot of random, like Abu Dhabi, a lot of random howler races where he just can't do anything. But you can tell that compared to Leclerc, he's actually thinking a lot about strategy and how to work and his racecraft. And we saw that in Singapore, and that's what could help him win a title. Whereas Leclerc is just going to drive hard and fast all the time and usually crash.
Yeah, just quickly on that, having Leclerc and Sainz, if they could combine their qualities, they would have maybe the driver to challenge Verstappen. If they could have a love child, which I'm sure a lot of Ferrari fans have written fanfics about. But they both have really good skills that would apply so well to a few situations. And it's like, can you, I don't know, talk to each other, maybe share what you know. It's not how it works in F1, but just share your knowledge, make it work, because they are so complementary. But that's useless in Formula One to have complementary drivers in terms of what they can and cannot do.
They're also not as complementary as they may look. In terms of their traits, they are somewhat, but in terms of their handling preferences, like Sainz prefers a more understeery car with a weaker front end, a very stable rear, while Charles prefers neutral rear that only breaks out when he makes it break out, and a very strong, very positive front end on the car. So they don't really like the exact same car. So that's also why last year Sainz was way off the pace compared to this year, because last year the car had the strong front end and the loose rear, and Sainz couldn't really get along with that. Didn't really adapt to it as well as well. Some people might have expected maybe, but it's really somewhat opposite his driving style preference, if you will. Leclerc, yeah. I mean, you could make a point that if you took the best traits of both, you have like a world championship caliber driver. But at the same time, you take the worst traits of both, and you have a back marker. You have Juji Ide.
You have Luca Badoer,
Yeah.
2001.
So, I mean, I keep calling Leclerc Massa 2.0 because he has this. He's not. He's really fast when it matters. But he cracks under pressure, and I don't know. It's probably not the most accurate comparison, but there's certain parallels between them, and also with just how much Ferrari were infatuated with them. Of course, with Massa it was a bit like Santander induced, which in this case wouldn't apply. But yeah, I mean, who was it that said that Leclerc is basically Jacques on Saturday, no, Jill on Saturday and Jacques on Sunday? Was it Peter?
That was me.
Yeah, that was you.
He's also just Sean and Lacey Part 2. I mean, this is
Yeah.
Ferrari, they seem to operate on 30-year cycles because you can compare them now to like early to mid 90s. That these two are Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger, and you can look at the way Prost joined Ferrari. It didn't work out. He left them. You can compare that to Vettel, which I guess makes Hamilton Senna, or not Mansell, but yeah, it's that they're in that kind of phase where they're sort of there but not quite there, like near-ish to the front. Obviously, back then the biggest problem they had was their car broke down all the time because they had these stupid gearboxes, and they refused to admit that their engines were rubbish as well. Yeah, so you're just wondering who's going to be the Schumacher that's going to come in and, well, basically de-Italianize the team and make it work. Because
There's
yeah,
a Schumacher waiting.
yeah,
There's an actual Schumacher waiting.
unless that's going to be unless Kim, even though he's a Mercedes junior, unless it's Kimi Antonelli's job is to come in and fix Ferrari and bring balance to the Tifosi.
If Kimi can't do it, we can always just wait for Robin Raikkonen to come in, and then we're gonna finally have another Ferrari world champion.
Mm.
But that's
yeah,
gonna take a few more years.
Yeah, the Ferrari's problem at the moment is that they're too Italian, and that wasn't a problem they had when Schumacher was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also wasn't. Well, we need to know Leclerc had 5 or 6 pole positions this season. Was it 6 with Abu Dhabi?
Too many.
Probably
Yeah,
a lot,
that's
but no wins.
yeah, that's a lot for 2023. It's a whole lot, and it's like you forget. At least I forgot it was that many until you see it on a sheet of paper, because obviously, as we know, he loses the pole every single time. But that's a lot of pole positions for a season that is remembered as being dominated by Red Bull. And I remember, especially in Vegas, Ciaron getting really riled up about this. Leclerc just needs to challenge Max more. There's no fear to be had. The worst that can happen is a crash, which he could also do on his own. So there is nothing bad in just we saw it in Austria. We saw it in Austria 2 years in a row. Was it 2 years in a row? No, 2020 and 2022. There was nothing in 21. Or was 21 the anyway? In Austria, they have fought hard twice. They know how to do it, but for some reason, Max is more up to it than Charles, and that needs to change very fast. And as long as that doesn't change, even if Ferrari has a good race car, nothing is going to change. That's why I cannot see anyone challenging Red Bull until 26. But if there is someone, it's not going to be Ferrari, because I can't see Leclerc doing it. Now, Vasseur, I love the guy personally, and if you see what he does behind the scenes, he's genuinely funny. There are some people in F1 who are pseudo funny, like Danny Ricciardo, but Vasseur is quite actually a nice person. Is he the one who will, as Peter said, bring balance to the Tifosi? I'm not too sure that, but then again, who would?
I want to get Mr. 17% into circulation as a meme, because that's Leclerc's pole to win conversion rate.
For now,
that's insane.
It's not going to be that next year. It's going to be.
We just need to start calling him Mr. 17%. He's much too nice, because places like Vegas and that he may as well just go into each race accepting, okay, I'm not going to win, but I may as well go out of the bang. Like, just go to Max. Well, if I can't win, neither can you, and just have a couple of crashes.
Oh man.
Because him and Ferrari are much too nice. They sit there, they spend the first stint tootling around 10 seconds off the pace, like, okay, which of our 10 plans are we going to pick today? All of which are one stops that involve doing nothing but tire saving. It's like, here's a thought: maybe just try a 4-stop or even a 5-stop. Save all your soft tires and just do 90 minutes of quali laps. Maybe it will work. Like, someone just needs to try it once instead of this obsession of, oh, let's do a 1-stop all the time and save the tires and blah blah blah. Like, just do something different for once.
I'm so sick of tire saving. It doesn't help that Leclerc can't save his tires to save his life. Like, this is not the guy that you want to. Okay, so I know that the Red Bull is better on the tires than the Ferrari, but earlier this year, what I don't know, was it a practice session or a race at the start of the race? There was an occasion where I was just laughing out loud behind the screen watching F1. I think it must have been a race. Uh, Max started on the softs and Leclerc started on the mediums, so it must have been a race. And by the time that Leclerc came into the pits with the mediums, having already started to drop off, Max was still lapping without any notable drop off, and it's like, what are you even doing, Charles? Like I know it's a different car and everything, but it's still a harder compound by quite a step, and other teams weren't struggling as much, and with so you can't just blame it purely on the car or purely on the compound. It's just his tire management ability is just non-existent in my view. I know people are gonna disagree with that. Some people, like there's plenty of Charles fans. You can't write anything about like critical of Charles on Reddit, or just you're gonna just get downvoted. There's many reasons why I don't really use Reddit anymore. Um, but yeah, I mean, he's gonna have to master these skills. Strategy. Be proactive with the strategy in the cockpit. Don't just why are you guys doing this to me in a French accent when like the strategy doesn't work out? Or I am so unlucky and all of that. Like no, you make your own luck, mate. Michael Schumacher didn't come in there expecting to get lucky. Michael Schumacher made his own luck. He made that team win. He picked up the pieces there and he brought that team back to the front. And you need to do the same because that's what it takes to win a championship with Ferrari. Lauda knew this, and Michael Schumacher knew this, and you're gonna have to learn that, and you still haven't learned it. Vettel has learned it, but he learned it too late. So, yeah. Learn it now, Charles, or you're not gonna win that title because you cannot win the title on Saturday.
Well, Leclerc has to be as aggressive with his team as Ferrari is with their tires, basically in 2023, and basically he needs to look at the overtake of the year he just got for the move he got on Sergio Perez, which was a DRS dive bomb. But maybe getting that overtake of the year award will make him realize, okay, people think that this was good. I should maybe be doing this more. Side note, he got overtake of the year thanks to bots from Leclerc fans. Um, F1 fans are not that stupid to vote a DRS dive bomb as overtake of the year over Alonso's turn 10 overtake on Hamilton, which was objectively one of the best overtakes in recent history. But that aside, Leclerc just needs to be more aggressive, and it's not going to happen. That's the thing. We are talking about it. I do think it's a bit redundant to talk about Ferrari and Leclerc sometimes because it's like, oh, haha, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. It's so funny. Ferrari is sad, Leclerc is sad, they're unlucky. And sometimes it does feel like a bit of, bashing and bullying, but it doesn't change. It really, really doesn't change, and I don't see how it's going to change.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we should move on to the next team, which is Aston Martin.
Oh boy.
So technically they finished P5 behind McLaren, but for the sake of this, we'll consider them a front runner because they were consistently at the front all season, or at least one of their drivers was consistently at the front all season.
Most of the season.
Yeah, I mean, they gave me at the beginning of the year, they gave me so much hope, and it was kind of the only thing keeping things going because it's like, okay, Red Bull are going to walk it, but at least Aston Martin have improved suddenly, and Alonso, it feels like Alonso's back to the way he was like 20 years ago, and everyone's getting all excited. And Stroll was, even though miles off him, by his standards, it was sort of all right as well. But then you get 6 or 7 races in, and then it just starts to disappear. And then they pick it up again near the end, but by then the moment's gone, and it's just not when we thought maybe Alonso could start getting some wins here, but it just didn't work in the end.
Yeah, the only win that Alonso was close to getting was Monaco, really. Nev?
Yeah, just on Monaco, this one of my favorite memes of the entire season was not one in English. It was the Spanish people making a meme of Eran intermedios, which means it was time for intermediates. It became a big thing. There's one of the best edits I've ever seen, which is the two guys running with the medium tires onto the Titanic boat as it's drowning, because that's basically what Aston Martin would have done. That was extremely stupid. I do not know why they did that, because 3 laps earlier they had pitted Stroll on intermediates, and Bottas had also just pitted on intermediates, and it was working out. Why did Alonso get mediums and be the only one from that entire round of pit stop? I think maybe one other person did that, but that entire round of pit stops, he was the only one to get mediums. Yeah, it was a big let off. And again, the third sector in quali, a lot of people said that it was Max having one of the best third sectors of all time. Yes, he was wall bumping and wall riding a lot, but that was also, I think, Alonso not being quite up there with his third sectors. And that also opens up a discussion on how Alonso has been messing up his Q3s quite a few times this season. It hasn't been as noticeable because usually Lance is out in Q2 or Q1. But I'm interested to knowing how that will fare next season, because if the car is better and both cars start consistently getting into Q3, I think we might see more upsets than expected, with Stroll beating Alonso because of Alonso just making a stupid, but really, really stupid mistakes. It's not even little drifts. It's usually just missing a breaking point sometimes. So, yeah, Aston Martin, they started off the season extremely well. And then from Monaco onwards, it kind of petered away. And they came back again.
I mean, it's also for one. I just double checked. Stroll did end up in Q3 at least 10 of the races, maybe more. But I have comparable lap data for both of them in 10 different races for Q3. So that's worth noting. So it's not like he most of the time he didn't make Q3. Like, you know, roughly half the time he did make Q3.
It's most, haha.
Yeah, well, he might have made it more often than it's listed, because the list doesn't include lap times that were like 2+ seconds off the pace because of like some issues on in Q3, like when there was no timed lap or that kind of stuff. Aston Martin as a team and with the car did start out pretty strong at the start of the season, but it also is worth keeping in mind that Stroll did start off on the back foot already before he even started the first race, because of course he had that cycling accident and he missed preseason testing entirely, which is a very important session because that's where the teams and drivers find the baselines for their setups for the whole season and familiarize themselves with the car. And like Aston Martin said, 99%, or what did I say, 90% of the car is different to last year. So it's not like you can't really make the argument that, oh, Stroll already knew the car. Like the 2021 Ferrari was much closer in handling to the 2020 Ferrari than the 2023 Aston Martin was to the 2022 Aston Martin. Like the difference was huge. And it was quite a nicely drivable car at the start of the year, of course, being developed by Dan Fallows with Sebastian Vettel, of course. So that's worth noting. So Lance he missed the preseason testing because he had broken hands. Then at the first race, he finished P6 with still taped up hands, broken. He was lifting the hands off the steering wheel because he was in pain on the straights to like avoid the vibrations from the car and not get that in there. So that's Bahrain. Then Jeddah, he was still strongly affected by the injuries. The team confirmed that he wouldn't be fully recovered until at least after Australia. At Australia, he was still slightly affected by the injuries. Of course, also worth noting that he lost quite an amount of momentum at Jeddah with that engine failure in the DNF that was no fault of his own, because that would have easily been a P4, because he was on course to overtaking Russell. He had done a brilliant overtake on Sainz at the start of the race and was saving battery. You can see this on the onboards that he was harvesting for the battery for the overtake on Russell. Then the engine failure started. He had to deploy the battery to even barely keep ahead, but then pit stops happened and he had lost position, and they decided to retire the car because that wasn't really going to be going anywhere anymore, and probably would have even lost them more if they had kept running. So that was the only solution there. He got a lot of criticism for Australia, where he did finish P4, but of course did go off the track on that restart that was nullified. So I never thought it was really fair to judge him as harshly for that, because like more drivers than him went into the gravel on that restart lap. The sun was very low; it was blinding like a bunch of drivers on that lap because it was already so late in the day by that point. In the evening, well, yeah, and so there's Australia. Baku, mostly flawless race in Baku. He was one of like 10 drivers who brushed the wall at one point or another, and he had that one
Just
turn
on Baku,
15 where he ran wide and had let Hamilton through, and so that's the only
Baku
real
incident
mistake he made in
was
Baku.
no, just the Baku incident was really funny because that was just after Alonso said, "Give him my brace balance situation," and so I wouldn't even blame Lance for that. I'm actually backing you up on that because
Yeah.
the team gives him Alonso's brake balance, and obviously it wasn't mischievous. It was just a different brake balance than he was used to. So
Yeah.
the very next lap, he just nearly crashes.
I'm not sure if he actually did end up
Baku was a
using
good race.
I'm not sure if he actually didn't end up using Alonso's brake bias settings, but he did get them at the very least. Yeah. But of course, Alonso likes so much understeer, and that's like would be completely undrivable for Stroll, as we saw later in the season when the car just became generally understeery and everything. The balance was just nowhere for a driver like Stroll, who likes a far more neutral setup. And of course, Alonso has pretty much the most extreme understeer preference on the grid with his brute force driving style. That's really effective, but also really ugly. But it's probably the most effective driving style on the grid, Alonso's. That there's no denying that. So that's Baku. Then there's Miami, where the team gambled in Q1 with the tire strategy, tried to get both cars through on a single set of softs in Q1, which was a big risk, and ultimately Stroll didn't get through, and both drivers called this out afterwards that this was like way too risky, that bad strategy. Alonso barely made it through, so that basically cost him the race in Miami, because that just turned into a massive DRS train, and Stroll did get a whole lot of overtakes that race, but it just wasn't enough to really salvage the situation. Like, he was one of the drivers with the most overtakes that race. Monaco, he lost out in qualifying because he picked up damage from the, I think from Norris in Q2, from the debris from Norris. Was it Norris or was it Perez who had the debris in Q2? One of
Might have been
them.
Perez.
And so that's where Stroll picked up damage, and that compromised his qualifying there, so he was out in Q2. Drove a fantastic race until the mistakes in the rain. Amazing overtake, great overtaking. But then there was that situation with Magnussen, where Magnussen pulled that defending move, which Brundle called out immediately. Like, that was way too late of a defending move. No penalty for Magnussen. Perez cut the chicane after Stroll overtook him because he couldn't make the turn, and ended up ahead of Lance and never had to give the position back. So that's also where Lance got screwed in Monaco. Like, I know that Lance is he's not even a top 10 on the grid driver, but like, if you look at his season in detail, there's so many places where he's just had really bad luck and lost out. Like, that you get to Canada, for example, Q2 in Canada, the team brought out the wrong tires after his spin. Like, he came into the pits, of course, the spin, his fault, no debate there, but their team should have put him on softs, and they have, like, recently admitted, like a few races before the end of the season, it came out, yeah, this was a mistake. They wanted to bring him on the softs, but they accidentally took old intermediates, and that completely screwed Lance, because that was the soft window. That's where everyone said their laps, they got them through to Q3. Lance couldn't profit off of that, and that screwed him there. Silverstone screwed by safety car timing. He pitted one lap before the safety car came out, and that would have easily been a P9 or something. there's so many examples of this stuff, and he had such a rough season because the upgrades, of course, every upgrade they brought just made the car more and more understeery and erratic to drive. And then there was by Qatar, that car just it basically handled like the 2014 Ferrari. If you look at the onboards and if you look at even the normal broadcast, you can even see it on the normal broadcast just how twitchy that Aston Martin was by the time Qatar rolled around. Like takes the understeer into the corner, and then suddenly there's a snap oversteer. The rear snaps around, the front just completely unstable. And then of course, there was that whole incident where he shoved his personal trainer after one of the races in frustration, and that got made into something way bigger than it was because that's a moment that would have never just like drivers like Michael Schumacher would have done this kind of stuff as well. It just wouldn't have been broadcast. Like let's be honest here. Like drivers just do get frustrated during races, especially when the car is undrivable in this case. And then we finally got some interviews from Stroll at that point in the season where he did call out the car and how it changed and how he didn't know what went wrong in the development path, but that the car was just undrivable now. And he went into quite a lot of detail actually there. So that was really interesting to hear because normally, I don't know. He wasn't blaming Aston Martin for like operational problems. He was just complaining about the car and how the handling changed, and understandably so. And then they brought the upgrades late in the season, and then he was back. He also grew the goatee, so that could also have been like a reason why he was suddenly better. Because like it seems that Stroll is always the best when he either has a goatee or his hands are broken. So one of the two. But, yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, he was losing positions, but he was losing positions from basically 7th up. Like it wasn't like he was fighting for wins or podiums and then he has a dodgy pit stop and ruins it or whatever. He was not. There were very few races, well, basically no races where he was either on par with or beating Alonso, unless you count Spain. But that reeks of just Alonso letting him beat him.
Alonso also had
Spain, Alonso fucked up his Alonso messed up his flow in Q1 as well.
Yeah, but Alonso also had more favorable tire strategy in Spain, so that's like Alonso was on like 10 laps fresher tires by the end, so of course Alonso was going to catch Stroll.
My issue wasn't the race pace; it was the fact that even when Lance finally outqualified him, which I was happy for Stroll because he needed that. It was with a damaged flow. I mean, I'm echoing what Peter is saying. It was. Well, he should have been doing better in any case, at least I think.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, it's his best season, but it's clearly worse than 2020.
It's worse than the last 2 seasons, really, because especially in 2021, Stroll kept putting that car, which was the 7th best car in the grid for the most part, in the lower points positions or just outside the points, and consistently so. Like his average finishing position was just 1 position lower than Vettel's. And of course, Vettel had the higher peaks, but Stroll was the more consistent driver in 2021. And across 2021 and 2022, the race head-to-head between Stroll and Vettel was 19-19, completely even. And the average quality gap between them both years was only like 1/10. They were really close. Like that. So I would say 2021 was probably Stroll's strongest season at Aston Martin of the 3 ones, and maybe even of the seasons before. Although Monza 2020 was a strong performance, although it could have been better. He could have won that race potentially. Turkey he could have won, but that went away from him. I'm not sure if that would have been realistic. Turkey 2020.
We're talking about individual errors costing laps or races. Well, we had to talk about that Singapore crash, which was probably the biggest crash of the season, and which that led to Aston Martin's worst weekend of the season, which really needs to be pointed out. Monaco was great. Zandvoort was fantastic. Interlagos as well. But Singapore was at the start of the season deemed to be where they would have a shot at the win. In the end, Ferrari were stellar, McLaren were really good, Aston Martin were nowhere, both Lance and Fernando were nowhere, and I think that was the really, really dark spot in their season. The fact that not only did Singapore go that badly, but also they were meant to be doing what Sainz had done. Again, going back to the start of the season, it genuinely felt like Aston Martin would be a boring second fastest. I really thought it would be Verstappen, Perez, Alonso as the podium at least 10 to 12 times. And that didn't happen, as we know. So Lance also not getting a podium is quite a big let off, I think, when he's the only one from the top six teams to not have gotten a podium.
I mean, you have to consider for Lance to get a podium, he has to not only beat at least one most often there was only one Red Bull on the podium, so he has to, let's just say he has to beat at least either one Red Bull or one Ferrari and his teammate, because whenever Aston had a chance at a podium, Alonso was there to take that podium, and I don't know. There's something to be said about. People don't like that Stroll was in the second best car at the start of the year, because he didn't deserve to be in the second best car on the start of the year, obviously, because he's just not a top 10 driver, not really that, not even that close to being a top 10 driver. No one was complaining when he was in a lower midfield car the last 2 years, and there was no guarantees before the season that this was going to be such a strong car. So it's like you can't really fault him for lucking into this car, because like, if this would have been the seventh best car again, no one really would have cared, and he could have just kept delivering on the same level as the last 2 years and would have probably been quite consistent. But yeah, so there's that.
Well, scoring 26% of the team's points just isn't acceptable. I'm not sure if Peter has the stats, but it's one of the lowest percentages of points that a teammate has scored for such a big team, basically in the last 20 years.
Yes, but if you correct his points standings for bad luck, like pitting right before a safety car, or
of course,
his engine failure, or his engine issue, what were engine issues in Japan, that where he would have finished right behind Alonso, and that cost him points there as well. A rear wing failure that costed DNF in Japan, right? Not engine. That was a rear wing where he went into the pits. The guys touched the rear wing and it was just bouncy, and they went, nope, this car is not going out again. Like, yeah, scoring just 26% of the points, that's unacceptable. But like in this situation, if you correct him for bad luck, he has slightly more than half the points of Alonso. And that's not a terrible gap to have as an Alonso teammate. Massa sometimes had bigger gaps to Alonso than that, without as much bad luck necessarily, because Massa just wasn't really on the pace. So, and this also makes sense because Stroll and Massa were extremely far off each other when they were teammates, and Stroll was just a rookie. So, like, this kind of makes sense as to where Stroll and Massa stack up in comparison to Alonso, in my view. So yeah, 26% of the points. If you look at just the statistics and completely ignore the context, yeah, it's terrible.
The only bigger
if you look at the context, then yeah.
The only bigger discrepancy this year was Williams, where Logan Sargent got just under 4% of their points. One out of
that's
20,
a back marker, so
27 or 28. Yeah.
It's always harder to compare with back markers. But yeah, this season in the end for Aston Martin was definitely unexpected. They were the fun team of the first 2 months, that's for sure. They were very entertaining, both with Alonso shenanigans on social media and through just the team having good vibes from their success. And it's really hard to understand how they did not know how a car works, because we haven't touched upon, I think, we haven't addressed the elephant in the room in terms of Aston Martin, because the obvious issue is they do not know how to upgrade their car, and they eventually worked out a car that worked in Brazil, but that was only by fiddling with past upgrades and new upgrades. basically trying to find something. And that's unacceptable for a top team. So hopefully next season, maybe Dan Fallows will have more of a say, even more of a say in development. Maybe the team knows a bit more how a car should work. But this season, the fact that after the second place in Canada, they were nowhere for 5 races was just appalling to witness. Yeah, I just wonder if they have basically the facilities to challenge next season, because they do have the wind tunnel that's coming over, but are they going to be at the same level of professionalism and understanding as Ferrari or Mercedes? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's not really looking good. I mean, to me, they've essentially been displaced by McLaren, so I don't have particularly high hopes for next season for them.
And
Don't
what
have
do
a
you think
development driver, so
about? And what do you think about their two drivers? Because eventually, I guess Alonso will be dropping in pace, and eventually Lance will not be the driver they need.
I mean, at the moment, they can sort of get away with being there because the only Aston Martin Jr. is Drugovich, who's just kind of okay, and the moment has gone with him. But yeah, obviously, Alonso he shouldn't be driving this well at his age. That's the problem. And Lance just shouldn't be there at all. So they could find other people to fill that role, but at the moment they can just about justify keeping those two, because they don't have. It's not like if Red Bull, where they've got like 15 juniors, or Alpine that have got a massive bunch. They've only got one, so there isn't a huge
They've got
demand.
Rebecca Hawkins, apparently faster than Lance.
Yeah, allegedly. Yeah, but well, maybe they'll throw her in. They'll probably throw her in FP1 at some point just for publicity, I imagine.
I think Stroll has merited a seat in F1, but just not at a top team. But of course, like I said, this was a lower midfield team. There was no guarantee that this was going to be a top team. So, like, complaining about him having the seat in retrospect when there was no guarantee that this seat was going to be good, like, I suppose.
Swap Albon and Stroll. That's my new rumor. Just swap them.
Swap Albon and Stroll. To be honest, yeah,
Send
Stroll
Lance
probably
back
should
to
not be driving for his
Williams.
father.
Yeah, send Lance back to Williams, away from his father, and somewhere where he will still be getting a few outstanding performances and getting a few points here and there. His fans are gonna like it, and just he is gonna like it more. And then put Albon, who's extremely good at development, so we don't have Fernando Alonso trying to make the car just not work for anyone. And then Alonso might actually be challenging for wins. So that's my new rumor for 2025. Just swap them.
Yeah, that could work.
I mean, Stroll can be a big fish in a small pond then, as well, and have a
Yes.
much less competitive teammate that's not going to beat him all the time.
Yeah, the thing I was going to say about Stroll is also he hasn't exactly had it easy in F1. Like, okay, yeah, his seat was always guaranteed, but he has faced some of the most experienced F1 teammates of all time.
But that was his
Like,
choice.
he's not a
That
top
was his
driver.
family's choice.
You would have never expected him to beat those. So like he was
But that
there,
was his family's
faced
choice. He was meant
Massa,
to learn from
Vettel,
them.
and, huh?
He was meant to learn from them. That was his dad's choice to put him with those
Yeah,
drivers.
but that also meant that in the eyes of the fans, like of course he never beat any of his teammates except he wiped the floor with Sirotkin. Not so much in quali, but in the races, absolutely. And that certainly did lower people's view of him, just because, like, yeah, he never started beating the aging Vettel, and he's now not beating the ancient Alonso. But those are like top 5% of all time F1 drivers. Stroll's not that. He's maybe top 30%, top 40%, something along those lines. Like historically, across the whole history of the sport, he's an above average driver. Like I don't think there's any disputing that. Like, but yeah, I wouldn't expect Stroll to beat Alonso, even if Alonso was 40. I don't know, 45, 50 even necessarily. As long as Alonso is keeping up this level of performance to a noteworthy degree, and And it's mostly in the races where Alonso is amazing, because Alonso has never been the greatest qualifier, especially in Q3, as you well know. So, but in the races, Alonso puts it together and has had less bad luck this year. I guess this year Alonso kind of got made up for last year, where he had really bad reliability and bad luck at Alpine, and then the year before. So
My personal conclusion from Aston Martin this season is, if they do build a title contender next season or 2025, which would be even worse, I'm not sure they would be able to challenge at all, because Lance, obviously, he wouldn't be able to challenge Max or Fernando. And Fernando, he is starting to lack this edge in, well, qualifying at least, which can prove to be very important in a battle. So I'm not sure if we ever will see Aston Martin um, consistently at the top, but I do think that there's definitely potential for a win or two, and that if Aston Martin doesn't get a win before the change of the regulations, it would be a disappointment with the current momentum.
I mean, you could make a case for Stroll on the basis that at the end of the season, the last 5 races, he was in fact the stronger Aston Martin driver this year. And if you look at the telemetry, like f1tempo.com if you want, or whatever the site is called, you can look at the telemetry. Generally, Stroll was lapping 3/10 faster than Alonso for pretty much the last 5 races, whenever the data is actually comparable. Like the last race, their strategies were so offset in Abu Dhabi that the data is not really that comparable. But before that, most of those races, like Mexico, Alonso allegedly had damage. The team never confirmed that, and after the race, Alonso said something along the lines of, "We might have had damage or something." Which also brings me to something we discussed 2 episodes ago, that a driver who feels the car really well doesn't go, "We might have had damage." Like Kimi wouldn't say, "We might have had damage." He would have said, "We had damage," or "We didn't have damage." And Alonso is always like, 3 or 4 times this season that Alonso said something along the lines of, "We may have had damage from whatever at the start of the race." And it's like, did you or did you not? How can you not know? Well, then, whatever. That's just years of experience. You need to know this, Alonso.
I think he has enough experience to be saying that on purpose, which is not better. But
Yeah.
I think that's just yet again another smartish move from him. There were 2 smart moves he made this season. It was on the radio when things were not going well, and secondly, on the track with most of his overtakes of the month. So yeah, great season for him. I'm not sure he is up there as some people think. I don't think he is close to Max at the moment, but he is definitely in the top 3. It's your choice as to who is better between him and Lewis at the moment, but we will see how it goes next season. Aston Martin showed a lot of promise. They have a lot of potential through investment and through commitment. Now it's their job to deliver.
Yeah, Ciaron has commented on this many times, that it's just a testament to how bad the rookies, how bad the junior categories are, how shallow the talent pool is, that it's still Alonso and Hamilton who are the second and third best drivers, that only Max Verstappen over these last 10 years was able to break through those two. And that's really a testament to, he's completely right about that. It's a testament to just how shallow the talent pool is, and that Leclerc can't get his act together. Norris can't get his act together. Norris should have won in Russia 2021. Like, absolutely should have won that race. And Russell is also still being comfortably beaten by Hamilton. So none of these most promising rookies are breaking through except for Max.
Yeah, it's just it's the way things are. We've had this now for nearly 25 years of one driver dominates, and it just means that we get a lot of talented drivers who basically get wasted because they miss their chance to be in the best car at the best time, and they just have to work with what they got, and it isn't enough. And yeah, we've seen this before that Alonso and Kimi broke through, but then someone like Montoya basically fell by the wayside, and we're seeing it now with, yeah, like you said, we're seeing it now with Leclerc, Russell, Albon, Norris, even Sainz to a degree. That these lot, it's like they've missed their chance to get any titles. They're just going to pick up the odd win here and there, but Max is just going to keep winning until he retires, and by then they'll be too old to really capitalize on that, because then you'll have the Kimi Antonellis and the Paul Arons and Franco Colapintos and whoever else it will have come through and be kind of raining on their parade instead.
Well, it's incredible the fact that there will probably be no F1 champion born between 1987 and 1997. That's an entire generation being skipped because of, well, the domination going straight from Mercedes to Max Verstappen. So I think Rosberg was born in 86 and Vettel was born in 87. And then I do not see anyone born between 87 and 97 winning anymore. It's an entire generation that's missed the bus, the world champion bus, basically. And that generation, well, it's Bottas, Ricardo, Magnussen, Sainz, I guess, is the last really good chance. It's
Yeah.
never happened before that there's been 10 years which haven't produced an F1 champion. But it's the situation we're facing, the fact that the next world champion is probably going to be younger than Verstappen.
But who would that be?
Exactly.
Because Antonelli, first he has to get through the F2 gauntlet, and then he actually has to get a seat at a team where he has prospects for a brighter future in F1.
I would be surprised if Piastri doesn't win one. That's
The
my
list of
personal-
candidates is so short. Yeah, okay, Piastri, maybe if
I see
McLaren
it.
get their act together,
see
but he
it.
needs to also get a good seat. Otherwise, it's somewhere else. If he can't do it at McLaren, yeah, I don't know. This is very open-ended.
I think Piastri is clearly the best from the 98 to 2000 and perhaps 5 generation. I think he dominates a span of 7 years in terms of skill. Anyway, that will be a topic to keep in mind for the McLaren conversation that we will be having in the next episode.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we'll just see. Obviously, these are three of these teams are the ones most likely to try and challenge. Well, unless you count McLaren, challenge and beat Red Bull, and I guess we'll just have to see if they can step up and make the title fight a bit more interesting next year.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully they all help us be more entertained and not just hear the Dutch anthem 20 times.
Yeah. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Join us for the third part of our 2023 season review, where we shall cover the two honorary midfielders, McLaren and Alpine. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.